Caroline stepped onto the set as if it were just another familiar debate, a stage she had dominated before with sharp words and unwavering confidence. She thought this time would be no different. She'd talk over others, steer the conversation, and dismantle her opponent with eloquent jabs. But within minutes, she realized she was wrong. Not just about her opponent, but about the stage, the audience, and the very context she was standing in. At 8:40 a.m. on a Thursday, the atmosphere in the studio was thick with tension. 4 people sat around the table, 3 cameras zoomed in close, and in the control room, a producer would later admit, we could feel something was about to blow. Jasmine Crockett sat still, lips pressed, pen in hand, not fidgeting, not defensive, just ready. Caroline Leavitt, on the other hand, was a storm. For nearly 10 minutes, she bulldozed through the segment, talking over the moderator, jumping from topic to topic like it was a game show. She came in with a smug energy, unapologetically aiming to crush Jasmine with sharp attacks, most veiled in sarcasm, some unmistakably direct. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moderator turned to Jasmine and asked, "Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond?" Jasmine didn't blink. She looked directly at Caroline and said, "Yes, but before I respond to her opinion, I think we should talk about why she gets so loud every time I speak." The entire studio fell silent. Jasmine calmly opened a folder that had been resting on her lap the whole time. No one had noticed it. No one knew it held something that could shift not only the trajectory of the show, but perhaps the way America sees modern politics. She pulled out a single sheet, just one, and handed it to the moderator. "This is an internal campaign memo," she said, her voice steady. "It was approved by Ms. Leavitt's team 2 weeks ago. It outlines a strategy for targeting women of color in Congress, not through policy debates, but through tone. The goal was to portray us as aggressive, unhinged, and irrational, especially when we push back." Caroline's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jasmine continued, her gaze unwavering. "This document was never meant to be public, but someone sent it to me. I didn't say anything at first because I needed to verify it, and now I have. So, if we're going to have a public dialogue, let's be transparent about everything." Caroline shot up. "You're lying," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You staged this. This is a setup." The moderator froze. The cameras kept rolling. A producer discreetly signaled the tech crew. As Caroline sat down, then stood back up, unsure what to do, Jasmine just looked at her, calm and composed. "I'm not playing any games," Jasmine said. "I'm simply reading what your team wrote about people like me. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why it was written in the first place." What the public witnessed that day, the accusation, the memo, the stunned silence in the studio was only the tip of the iceberg. What truly kept Jasmine Crockett still in her seat without blinking, without shouting, armed only with a single sheet of paper, had begun days earlier in a place that seemed determined to have nothing to do with politics. 5 days before the program, Jasmine met Shelby Barnes, her closest friend from college, at a quiet little cafe in Des Moines, Iowa. Not the capital, not New York, just a humble street corner where Jasmine often retreated from the political whirlwind to reconnect with the simple truth. Why she entered this arena in the first place. Shelby wasn't in politics, never had been. But she possessed a terrifying gift, the ability to see through people's social masks, to read what they didn't say. And that day, after a sip of coffee, she didn't beat around the bush. "Caroline isn't just mocking you, Jazz," she said. "She's baiting you. She wants you to react. She wants you to lose control. It's a setup." Jasmine sighed. She already knew, but hearing it spoken aloud from Shelby brought clarity. "I'm not playing that game," Jasmine murmured. "She wants a show. I'm not performing." But deep down, Jasmine knew. This wasn't the first time Caroline had come for her. Not on TV, not in hearings, not even at diplomatic dinners in D.C. Caroline had a habit of saying things that sounded harmless but were carefully crafted to provoke. Then she'd sit back and watch as Jasmine got labeled as overreacting. 2 weeks ago, Jasmine had heard whispers about an internal meeting in Caroline's campaign. A meeting focused on strategy where her name had come up repeatedly. At first, just gossip. But then an email landed in her inbox. No subject line, no introduction, just one attachment. Draft messaging memo internal. PDF. She didn't open it immediately. In her world, anonymous tips were double-edged swords, truth or trap. She forwarded the file to a trusted contact in media circles, someone who'd helped her vet leaks before. 3 days later, he texted back only one sentence: "It's real. Very real." Inside the memo was everything Jasmine feared. Not a policy debate, but character attack. A full-blown strategy complete with timelines, talking points, and media cues staged like a Hollywood script. Target emotions, trigger reactions, label them as irrational. Then let the audience conclude, she's out of control. One line gripped her heart. If they react too fast, call them impulsive. If they stay quiet, call them rehearsed. Either way, they lose. She read it over and over. Each word slithered under her skin, cold, calculated, venomous. And what angered her most wasn't that it was about her. It was about every woman like her. Those branded as loud, too emotional, or too sensitive every time they dared to speak up. Jasmine didn't forward the file to anyone. Not her advisors, not her comms team. She kept it to herself like a truth not yet ripe, waiting for the right moment to explode. Sunday night, she decided if Caroline wanted to play TV games, fine. But the rules would change: no yelling, no arguing, just the truth. Let the truth do the shouting. Monday morning, she met with her team. No details, just one line. "Let me handle the panel. Trust me." They looked at her like they knew what she was about to do and yet had no idea. On social media, promos for the show flooded every feed. The clash of Congress's sharpest voices streaming live this Thursday. One side, the MAGA flame, a fiery former White House press aide. The other, the blue steel spear, a former criminal defense attorney, now a congresswoman representing the misjudged. Producers anticipated drama. Caroline was sure she'd run the show. No one knew Jasmine was carrying a weapon, not her voice, but a piece of paper. Thursday morning, Arizona. The air was unusually crisp. The studio was set in the Scottsdale suburbs, chosen as a neutral site accessible to both guests and crew. Jasmine arrived 20 minutes early as always, not to fix her makeup, but to feel the room. She sat in the green room, greeting each crew member with a soft smile. She didn't say much, just flipped through her notebook and read the memo once more. That navy blue folder never left her lap. Caroline arrived later with a media consultant, a personal assistant holding iced coffee and a spare blazer. She laughed loud, talked fast, waved at the crew like a campaign stop. When her eyes met Jasmine's, she didn't flinch, just swept past as if she saw no one. A young production assistant whispered, "Is she always this quiet?" Jasmine heard it. She didn't reply. Just flipped to the next page. Calm, precise. 10 minutes before air, the floor manager entered. "We go live at 10. Mike's in too." Jasmine stood, folded underarm, and approached the hallway. She pulled the floor manager aside and said quietly, "I have a document I'd like to hand to the host during the segment. It's relevant to the topic. Not an attack, just information." The manager raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "As long as it doesn't derail the show." "It won't," Jasmine replied. "It'll clarify it." Then she walked onto the set. No scanning, no sensing. She already knew what it would be: glossy, curated, and hungry for conflict. Caroline was already seated, fixing her hair in the camera mirror. "Oh, brought your notes this time," she said loudly, just enough for the crew to hear, mocking. Jasmine didn't blink. "I always have notes," she replied. "Just never had to use them until now." One technician nearly chuckled. Another looked up from their console. Caroline tightened her lips. The floor manager ran through the rundown. "Who gets introduced first? Major topics? When to cut to commercial?" Jasmine nodded gently. She didn't care much about that script because what she was bringing wasn't written in any broadcast schedule. When the live light turned red, the studio shifted into on-air mode. But the drama didn't need production effects. The moderator opened with his usual tone, polite, polished, without a scratch. He introduced the guests, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas and former White House Deputy Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Both smiled, camera perfect. Caroline gave a slight nod. Jasmine held steady eye contact. The storm hadn't hit, but the surface had started to ripple. The first few questions played out like a well-rehearsed score: border, budget, education spending. Caroline answered fast, sharp, nonstop, leaving no pause between points. She portrayed herself as the order keeper in chaos, someone who understood policy, structure, and family values. Every sentence sounded crafted for Twitter. Jasmine led her talk. Then came the fifth question on political rhetoric and rising division. Congresswoman Crockett, the moderator, asked, "How do we rebuild dialogue when it so often devolves into personal attacks?" Jasmine didn't rush. She tapped her pen gently on her folder, then looked up. Direct, calm. "I think the better question," she said, "is who benefits from those personal attacks and how they're orchestrated." Caroline tilted her head. "Is that supposed to mean something?" Jasmine looked at her, not angry, not cold, just steady. "You know exactly what it means." She opened the folder, pulled out the paper, handed it to the moderator. "This is real," she said. "An internal memo from Ms. Leavitt's team. A media strategy not targeting policies, but targeting the character of women of color in Congress. Not to debate, to provoke, to trigger reactions, then label them as weak, out of control, irrational." Caroline blinked, her surprise too quick to hide, then smirked. "Absurd, fabricated." Jasmine didn't argue. "You can read it. Dates are clear. It's signed by 2 senior media advisors. My name and 2 other congresswomen are referenced directly, described as too reactive, easily rebranded, and emotionally unstable under pressure." The moderator flipped through the paper, his brow furrowed. "I'm not here to perform," Jasmine continued. "I'm here to ask, why are tactics like this considered fair play in politics? Why do we call women emotional instead of asking why they're forced to respond?" Caroline leaned forward, her voice rising. "This is exactly what people like you do. You turn everything into race, into gender. You've got no facts, so you cry foul. It's pathetic." The tension wrapped tight across the room. All cameras were still rolling. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'm not crying foul," she said. "I'm presenting facts, and you're proving them." Caroline nearly shouted, "You set this up. You knew this would go viral. You don't care about the truth. You just want a headline." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You're mad because now you're the headline." Caroline shot to her feet. In the control room, a producer signaled to cut. Another shook their head. This footage was too valuable to lose. The moderator tried to steer things back, but Caroline wouldn't stop. "You baited me with a fake document. You people only play identity politics because you can't win on policy." Jasmine leaned in slightly, voice as steady as breath. "Real debate requires honesty. If you want to win with ideas, don't hide behind manipulation." And that broke the program apart. The moderator called for a commercial break, but the cameras rolled a few seconds longer. And in those seconds, history was made. The moment that was supposed to fade into a commercial break became ground zero for a media earthquake. The cameras didn't cut. The feed was still alive and the nation was still watching. Caroline stood there, hands trembling as she unclipped her mic. She was no longer the confident figure who had strutted into the studio 30 minutes earlier. When asked, she simply said, "I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Day after day, I watched them talk about Representative Crockett, Representative Bowman, even Luna, like they were PR problems to manage, not people. She hadn't sent the file on impulse. She printed it, read every line, then decided to send it only after being certain Jasmine would be there, and she'd do something. When Jasmine's office received the news, There was no press release, no media blast, just a private message. Thank you for the courage we're all taught to suppress. That night, Jasmine live-streamed from her home. No crew, no script, just a white t-shirt and a tilted webcam. Someone asked, "Why didn't you just destroy her? You could have crushed her." Jasmine took a sip of water, looked straight into the lens, "Because I don't need to destroy anyone. Truth doesn't need makeup. It doesn't need effects. It just needs space to exist." Another comment came in. "What do you hope happens after all this?" She paused. "I hope people think twice before calling women too sensitive or out of control just because they don't react the way you expect. I hope campaigns stop hiring firms to weaponize emotion against opponents. And I hope next time a woman sits there silent while being disrespected, someone realizes she's not weak, she's holding her ground." The live stream chat overflowed with comments. "This is leadership. She didn't yell, but she won. That's inner strength. She didn't destroy the opponent. She reflected the entire system. And maybe that was the moment that made all of America stop and look again." Caroline Leavitt reappeared Monday afternoon, not on live television, but in a pre-recorded video posted on her campaign site. Plain white background, soft lighting, no slogans, just Caroline, hair gently tousled, face composed, tone restrained. "I apologize for my lack of composure during the recent panel. The situation was misrepresented. The document presented is not something I ever reviewed or approved. If there was a lapse within my team, I accept managerial responsibility." The apology sounded like a commencement speech, polished, sanitized, but audiences in 2025 were no longer viewers from 2005. They had seen the original footage. They had heard every inflection in that studio. One Twitter user wrote, "She's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry she got caught." Media immediately began comparing Caroline's carefully constructed apology to Jasmine's deliberate strategic silence. And then a new twist. On Tuesday evening, a local Toledo news station aired an exclusive interview. The subject: Dana Haskins, the whistleblower who leaked the memo. She sat in a modest studio, hands slightly trembling, but her voice unwavering. "I used to think media strategy was just about helping candidates define themselves. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized this wasn't messaging. It was manipulation. We weren't just analyzing opponents. We were trained to push them to the edge and then call them unstable." She paused, then looked straight into the camera. "I didn't send that document to make anyone go viral. I sent it so someone stronger than me, could show the world this isn't personal misconduct. This is an institutional strategy." Dana's interview set off a second wave. A former comms staffer from Florida, who worked on a conservative Senate campaign, shared anonymously, "We use phrases like emotionally rehearsed, camera-ready rage, and minority meltdown pattern. These weren't slips, they were playbook terms." A former campaign director from Ohio revealed that media training for female candidates even included a module titled, "How to Frame Reactions from Opponents of Color." One line from that guide read, "If they push back, label them defensive. If they stay silent, label them calculating. Either way, they don't get to win." Then came another shockwave, this time not from journalism, but from the digital shadows of social media. A 4-year-old clip resurfaced featuring a debate between Caroline and a black congresswoman. In it, Caroline smirked as her opponent discussed racial violence and then said, "You're being overly sensitive." 4 years ago, no one batted an eye. Today, that line became a cultural meme. She didn't change. Society just changed how it listens. As public discourse turned toward deeper questions, are we programming people to fail? One voice emerged from inside the system. Sheila Moore, former senior strategist for a prominent 2020 presidential campaign, published a lengthy statement. "As someone who has written dozens of media prep guides, let me confirm. Labeling emotion is a calculated tactic. The targets are usually women of color, immigrant women, and LGBTQ+ candidates. We never called them wrong. We called them hard to sell on television. The post garnered over 3 million views in under 24 hours. Sometimes what you once called strategy becomes your own indictment. As for Jasmine, she stayed the same. No rebranding, no stardom, no chasing the spotlight. She just kept walking, not with glitter but with gravity. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Jasmine Crockett didn't leave that program as someone who had won a debate. She walked out like a walking declaration, a period, and a question mark pressed directly against the face of the system. How many more have to be silenced before justice learns how to listen? No background music, no waving flags. Just a navy blue folder clutched in her hand like a new symbol of justice. No slogans, no hatred, just facts, just evidence. And no one dared say it didn't exist. That weekend, on a Sunday morning talk show, the host asked the audience, "Have you ever been wrongly punished? Have you ever felt voiceless?" Over 60% raised their hands, not because they knew Jasmine, but because they were Jasmine in their own stories. On TikTok, one caption was reposted thousands of times. "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the bar." In a civics class in Atlanta, a teacher pointed at the screen and said, "You just witnessed a piece of history." And history isn't always written in blood, guns, or laws. Sometimes it's written in the silence that came exactly when it needed to. The following week, Jasmine's office received an email from a 62-year-old woman in Mississippi. "I've never voted in my life. I didn't think anyone represented me. After that program, I registered." In the YouTube comments, one user wrote, "I used to think politics was about who could yell the loudest. Turns out the one who stands their ground is the one still standing." And maybe that's what Jasmine Crockett truly gave us, not a win, not virality, not a speech, but a mirror. Something anyone, politician, citizen, or eighth grader, can look into and ask, if the truth makes you furious, maybe the problem isn't the truth. Maybe it's how long you've been living with the lie. And if you see yourself somewhere in this story, don't just scroll past, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that dares to speak the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. Because justice doesn't sleep, and truth doesn't need permission to exist. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's office remained publicly silent. No press conference, no Twitter thread, just an internal campaign email that ended with, "We don't need to speak. They're speaking for us." By Thursday, the narrative reached its apex. 3 major networks aired investigative specials dissecting the emotional engineering behind modern politics. How to make a female opponent look arrogant just for being firm. How to frame rebuttals as chaos. How to turn strength into performance. But the most unexpected shift didn't come from the media. It came from Congress. A coalition of young lawmakers, including some from the opposing party, released a joint statement. "We cannot continue teaching future leaders how to weaponize emotion for political gain. We must return to teaching them how to lead with truth." One conservative congresswoman who had previously criticized Jasmine posted a surprising message. "I don't agree with her politics, but I can't deny the truth she just revealed. And I know if I had been treated that way, I wouldn't have lasted here either." And somewhere far from the spotlight, beyond flashing headlines and primetime specials, Jasmine Crockett was writing, not a manifesto, not a campaign speech, just a thank you note to those who stood up, to those who had once stayed quiet out of fear, to those like Dana, who chose the exact right moment to say they weren't weak. The system was just too good at making them seem that way. 3 weeks after the explosive broadcast, the shockwaves had yet to subside. Caroline Leavitt, once hailed as the rising star of a new generation of sharp media-savvy spokespersons, was now tethered to a single phrase. Emotionally unstable when cornered. Not a smear from an opponent, but a quote from her own campaign memo. When a senior strategist confirmed that Caroline had known about the document at least since the beginning of broadcast week, public skepticism hardened into fury. A primetime news show opened with a bold red chirp from strategic offense to self-inflicted collapse. And then came Monday. The party's internal ethics committee announced a preliminary investigation into systematic and unethical media conduct targeting fellow members of Congress. Their interim report listed the use of racially and gender-biased language in campaign documents, training teams to manipulate opponents' emotional responses, publicly denying things known internally to be true. Caroline was asked to step down temporarily from her role as communications advisor to the party's policy committee, once her claim to fame. At a closed-door GOP Senate caucus, one senior senator reportedly murmured, "We didn't lose a young voice because of a smarter opponent. We lost her because we thought the media was a weapon to destroy others, not a mirror to keep ourselves clean." As for Jasmine Crockett, she didn't go on a victory tour. No live streams, no viral sound bites, no claims of triumph. Instead, she hosted a modest gathering in Tyler, Texas. No cameras, no script, just a multi-purpose hall, 100 folding chairs, a scratchy mic, and a few local community groups. An older woman raised her hand and asked, "I watched that panel. I had to ask, how did you stay calm when they were tearing you apart live on air?" Jasmine paused for a few seconds, then smiled. "I breathed, and I remembered I was sitting there, not just for me, but for the thousands who've never held the mic. And when you carry them with you, you don't get to scream and let them call you unhinged." A young man stood up from the back. "But don't you think it's unfair that women like you have to be flawless just to be heard?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "I used to try to be flawless. Not anymore. Now I just try to be clear. Because the next generation doesn't need theatrics. They need direction." The next morning, The Atlantic published a commentary titled, "Crockett Didn't Win with Blows. She Won with a New Standard." It broke down how she didn't raise her voice, but silence the room. She didn't strike back. She held up a mirror. She didn't just expose a rival. She forced a system to see itself. In a post-viral world, most stories fade fast. But some things linger, like the clip students replay in civics class. A teacher in El Paso posted, "One of my students asked, 'Why did the white lady freak out, but the black lady just sat there?' I didn't have a perfect answer. I just said, that's strength when you hold on to yourself while others lose theirs." At Congress, a new bill began circulating, calling for stricter transparency in campaign media training, its unofficial nickname, the Crockett Clause. Caroline Leavitt withdrew from major political forums. She gave one final speech at a small media ethics conference in Charleston. Her voice was steady but no longer blazing. "I learned what's real when I lost control of the frame.